The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the small ranch, where Samantha had spent countless summers volunteering. She loved this place for its quiet rhythm, the smell of hay, the earthy scent of leather, and the soft whinnies of horses greeting her as she approached their stalls. Life here was simple, but it was never boring. Every corner of the ranch held stories. Some whispered in the rustling of leaves, some shouted in the neigh of a startled horse, and some lingered in the laughter of the people who worked here. Samantha walked along the wooden fence, her fingers brushing against the rough grain. Her sun-streaked hair fell into her eyes, and she pushed it back with a quick flick of her hand, smiling at the sight of a young foal playing near its mother. The ranch always had a way of grounding her, pulling her away from the chaos of the town she came from. Here the world felt simpler. Decisions were straightforward: feed the animals, repair the fences, care for the land, and respect its rhythms. And yet, even in this calm life, she could not have predicted the arrival of Luke. He came in just as the sun began to dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. From a distance, he looked like any other cowboy: worn boots, faded jeans, a jacket that had clearly seen better days, but there was something about him that made Samantha pause. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, with a quiet confidence that didn't need to shout. Or maybe it was the way his eyes scanned the ranch, taking everything in, alert but calm. When he noticed her watching, he offered a small nod and a brief, polite smile. And Samantha felt an unexpected flutter of curiosity. She had worked alongside cowboys before, but Luke was different. He didn't talk much at first, simply observing the horses, checking the fences, and performing tasks with a precision that suggested years of experience. Yet there was also a softness in his movements. He handled the animals gently, and when a foal got too close to the barn door, he guided it back with careful patience. Samantha found herself drawn to this balance, strength paired with tenderness. It was rare, and she couldn't stop thinking about him. By evening, the ranch had taken on a warm glow under the fading sunlight. The animals were settling in for the night, and the air was filled with the mixed scent of hay, leather, and fresh earth. Samantha had finished her work in the barn and was walking back toward the main house when she found Luke standing near the fence, loosening his jacket. She noticed the small details: the calluses on his hands, the faint dust smudges on his shirt, the way he shifted his weight as if every movement had a purpose. "You work fast," she said casually, leaning against the fence post. Her voice carried a teasing note, the kind she used when she wanted to break the ice but didn't want to seem too forward. Luke glanced at her, and for the first time, he let a small smile appear. "I like to get things done before the sun sets," he replied, his voice low but steady. There was no boastfulness in his tone, only matter-of-fact honesty. Samantha nodded, intrigued. "You're new here, right?" she asked, stepping closer. She wasn't usually this forward, but something about him invited questions, and she wanted to understand more about the quiet intensity he carried with him. He nodded again. "Just arrived today. Heard this ranch was good work, and I like the pace." His eyes flicked toward the mountains in the distance, where the last rays of sunlight were disappearing. Samantha noticed a shadow cross his features, something she couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps fatigue, perhaps a memory. "Well, you'll find it's busy," she said with a small laugh. "There's always something to do, but if you can handle a barn full of horses, you'll fit right in." She smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected to feel toward a stranger. There was a pull, subtle but undeniable, that made her want to know more about him. As they walked toward the barn to check on the animals, Samantha found herself chatting freely. She told him about the horses, the stubborn ones, the playful ones, and the ones who liked to hide in corners. Luke listened, nodding occasionally, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. Samantha liked that. He wasn't just polite, he was attentive, and there was a quiet intelligence behind his gaze that made her feel understood in ways strangers rarely did. At one point, a young colt stumbled near the haystack, and Luke stepped forward quickly, catching it before it could hurt itself. Samantha's heart gave a small jump, not because of fear, but because she felt something in that moment: admiration. He moved with a mix of strength and care that suggested he had faced challenges before, challenges that demanded both courage and patience. "You have a way with them," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and curiosity. Luke shrugged slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "They trust you if you don't scare them? It's not complicated, really." His words were simple, but Samantha sensed there was more behind them. A history of learning through mistakes, perhaps, or lessons earned the hard way. By the time the sun had completely disappeared, the ranch was bathed in the soft glow of lamplight. The warmth from the lamps mixed with the cool evening air, creating a comforting, almost magical atmosphere. Samantha felt herself relaxing, enjoying the quiet companionship of someone new who seemed to understand the rhythm of this place. Luke's presence was calming, but there was also an undercurrent of mystery. She wanted to know more about him, about the stories his eyes hinted at, but his words had yet to reveal. As they finished their work and walked back toward the main house, Samantha noticed a small smirk playing on Luke's face as he looked at her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made her heart skip a beat. She decided to tease him, breaking the quiet tension she felt building between them. "You look like you've been working all day, cowboy. Bet you're ready to take that jacket off and relax," she said lightly, trying to keep her tone playful. Luke hesitated for a moment, just a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, before shaking his head with a faint laugh. "Some things aren't ready to be seen yet," he said cryptically, and Samantha felt a strange mix of curiosity and surprise. She laughed it off, assuming he was just shy or private. Little did she know, that moment was the beginning of something unexpected, a bond that would grow from curiosity to trust, from teasing to understanding. The first encounter, seemingly ordinary, was already laying the foundation for a connection neither of them could have predicted. As Samantha watched Luke move toward the stable, she couldn't help but feel that the ranch had become more than a place of work. It had become a place where stories began, where pasts whispered quietly in the evening air, and where the heart could recognize another without needing words to explain it. By the time Samantha returned to her small cabin on the ranch, the sky was dark, and the stars were beginning to twinkle above. She lay on her bed, thinking about the day, about the stranger whose presence had shifted something inside her. There was a spark of anticipation, a sense that meeting Luke had changed her summer in ways she could not yet understand. She drifted to sleep with a quiet smile, the sounds of the ranch lulling her into dreams filled with horses, open fields, and the mysterious cowboy who had walked quietly into her life. The next morning dawned clear and crisp over the ranch, with sunlight spilling across the fields and casting long golden shadows over the fences. Samantha rose early, as she usually did, to help with the morning chores before the ranch came alive with its usual bustle. She liked mornings best, the quiet, the calm, the sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the air like dew on the grass. She had just finished feeding the horses when she noticed Luke walking toward the barn. He moved with the same calm confidence she had seen the day before, his steps measured, his hands steady. He didn't rush, yet he seemed to get more done in an hour than most could in 2. Samantha felt a strange mix of admiration and curiosity about him. She wondered what had shaped him, what experiences had carved that quiet strength into his character. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying lightly across the barnyard. Luke turned, his expression softening slightly at the sound of her voice. "Morning," he replied simply, his voice calm and even. There was no trace of pretension in him, no desire to impress. He simply existed in a space that felt at once ordinary and remarkable. Samantha smiled, noticing the way the sunlight caught his hair and highlighted the sharp lines of his face. He was rugged, certainly, but there was a gentleness beneath it, a quality that made her feel at ease in his presence. They worked side by side, feeding the animals, checking fences, and preparing the barn for the day. Samantha found herself stealing glances at him, fascinated by the subtle movements that revealed both experience and care. He didn't just feed the horses, he watched them, studied them, understood them in ways that went beyond simple routine. And when one of the younger horses acted stubbornly, he handled it with patience, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. Samantha felt a growing respect for him, and she knew that she was not the only one noticing the quiet intensity he carried. After the morning chores, they moved toward the back of the barn where sunlight streamed through cracks in the wooden walls. The warm glow lit up the dust floating lazily in the air, creating a magical haze that made everything feel slightly dreamlike. Samantha laughed as she teased Luke again, nudging him lightly with her shoulder. "Come on, cowboy," she said. "It's time to cool off after all that work. You've earned it." Luke paused, a faint flicker of hesitation crossing his features. He glanced down at his worn shirt, then back at Samantha. For a moment, she thought it was just shyness, but then the lamplight, or rather the sunlight filtering through the barn's open doors, caught his shoulders in a way that made her stop in her tracks. Scars. They were not small or insignificant. They ran across his arms and shoulders, some faint and pale, some dark and jagged. They told stories of injury and survival, of moments that had left permanent marks both physically and emotionally. Samantha's playful teasing faded instantly, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent stillness. She realized that the quiet man she had been getting to know carried pieces of a life she could only begin to imagine, etched into his skin in ways words could not describe. Luke noticed her hesitation and offered a faint, rueful smile. "It's not a pretty sight," he said softly, almost as if apologizing for the existence of his own body. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a calm acceptance, a sense that he had made peace with the past. Samantha shook her head gently, wanting him to understand that she wasn't frightened, that she didn't see him as anything less because of these marks. "They're part of your story," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't need to hide them." For a moment, Luke seemed surprised by her words. Few people had ever spoken to him like that, acknowledging the past without judgment. He shifted slightly, the muscles in his shoulders tensing and relaxing, and then spoke, his voice steady. "Some things are easier to keep private," he admitted. "These scars, they remind me of mistakes, accidents, and choices I've made, things I don't usually talk about." Samantha nodded, understanding without needing more. There was something powerful about sharing a part of yourself so few could see, about trusting someone enough to let them glimpse not just the surface, but the history beneath. She felt honored, in a way, to be given even this small window into Luke's life. They continued their work, but the atmosphere had shifted. The playful teasing had been replaced by quiet respect, by a subtle awareness that both of them were navigating new territory, one of trust and vulnerability. Samantha found herself more attentive to every movement, every glance, every slight change in expression. Luke, for his part, seemed more relaxed, more willing to allow his presence to be noticed, to exist without pretense. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher, warming the barn and casting sharp patterns of light across the hay-covered floor. Samantha watched as Luke adjusted a fence post, the scars on his arms catching the light as he worked. She realized that they were not marks of weakness, but of strength. Each line, Each jagged edge told a story of endurance, of surviving challenges that would have broken many others. There was courage in those scars, quiet courage that did not need to announce itself. During a brief break, Samantha handed him a bottle of water, their fingers brushing slightly. The contact was brief but charged with unspoken acknowledgement, an understanding that they were seeing each other honestly, without masks. "Thanks," Luke said simply, taking the bottle. His eyes met hers for a moment longer than necessary, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition of connection that went beyond words. They spent the rest of the morning finishing chores, moving in rhythm with the animals, the barn, and the land itself. Samantha noticed how attuned Luke was to everything around him. The slight twitch of a horse's ear, the subtle change in wind direction, the way the sunlight shifted across the barn floor. It was as if he had learned to read life not just by sight, but by feeling, by observing, by understanding the quiet language of the world. By the time the work was done, the sun had reached its peak, casting a golden glow over the ranch. They walked together toward the small wooden porch of the main house, where a pitcher of fresh lemonade awaited. Samantha poured 2 glasses, offering one to Luke with a smile. "Here's to surviving the morning," she said lightly, trying to bring back some of the playful tone from earlier. Luke accepted the glass, his hand brushing hers again, and this time there was no hesitation. He smiled faintly, a small acknowledgement that he was beginning to feel comfortable, beginning to trust. "To surviving," he echoed, his voice carrying a warmth that had not been there before. As they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the world around them, Samantha felt a sense of calm settle over her. The morning had started as any other, but the encounter with Luke had changed everything. She realized that the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a space of discovery, of human connection, of understanding. She stole another glance at him, noticing the subtle ways the light highlighted his features, the quiet strength in his posture, and the scars that told stories she could only begin to imagine. And for the first time, she understood that these marks, these reminders of a past she could not know fully, were not something to fear or shy away from. They were a part of him, and in that moment, she found herself more drawn to him than ever. The hours passed quietly, filled with small conversations, laughter, and shared understanding. Samantha knew that the bond forming between them was unusual, special in a way that could not be rushed or forced. It was built on observation, patience, and a willingness to see someone fully, even when it meant confronting unexpected truths. And in Luke's case, those truths were written across his skin, in lines and scars that spoke of resilience, endurance, and a quiet, unspoken courage. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Samantha felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been physically demanding, yet emotionally enriching in ways she hadn't anticipated. Luke stood beside her, wiping sweat from his brow, and she realized that the playful teasing from the previous evening had already transformed into something deeper, something meaningful, something real. As they walked back toward the barn one last time before evening chores, Samantha felt an unspoken acknowledgement pass between them. They were learning to navigate this new connection, one that required patience, respect, and understanding. And she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that the story of this summer, and perhaps the story of both their lives, was only just beginning. The days at the ranch settled into a rhythm, with mornings full of work and evenings tinged with quiet reflection. Samantha had grown accustomed to the steady cadence of chores, but the presence of Luke added a subtle spark to her routine. He was no longer just the new cowboy who had appeared quietly one afternoon. He had become someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose presence made the long hours under the sun feel lighter. One afternoon, As the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the barn, Samantha noticed Luke moving with a careful deliberation she hadn't seen before. He was adjusting a stall door, his hands strong and precise, yet gentle enough not to startle the horses. She paused for a moment, watching him, and realized that every movement carried a story, a history of lessons learned the hard way. There was patience in his hands, a quiet resilience that spoke of years spent navigating challenges. "Luke," she called softly, stepping closer, "do you ever talk about what happened to you? About the scars?" She tried to keep her tone casual, but beneath it was a genuine curiosity. It wasn't just curiosity about his physical marks. It was a desire to understand the person behind them, to know what life had handed him, and how he had endured it. He paused, leaning against the wooden frame of the stall, his gaze following a distant horse grazing in the field. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if considering whether the past should remain unspoken. Then slowly, he nodded. "Some of it," he admitted. "Not all. Some stories are easier to carry alone." His voice was calm, even, but Samantha could sense the weight behind the words. They were not just stories of accidents or misfortune. They were fragments of life that had left permanent impressions. Samantha stayed silent, understanding that the right thing was to listen, not interrupt. She had learned over the weeks that patience often revealed more than questions ever could. Luke seemed to sense this, and after a moment he continued. "When I was younger, I didn't think much about risk. I worked with my father on the ranch he used to own. Horses, cattle, fences. Everything had to be done quickly, sometimes carelessly. I got hurt more times than I can count. Some of these scars, they're from mistakes I made, and some from accidents that weren't anyone's fault." Samantha watched him closely, noticing the subtle changes in his expression. The way his shoulders tensed slightly when he mentioned mistakes, the way his jaw tightened at the memory of pain. She realized that each scar was not just a mark of physical injury, but of experience, learning, and survival. They were reminders that life had challenges that could not always be avoided, but could always be faced with courage. "I see," she said softly, finally breaking the silence. "They're not just marks. They're reminders of everything you've survived." Her words were simple, but they carried sincerity. She wanted him to know that she didn't see him as broken or less because of his scars. If anything, she saw strength, courage, and resilience. Luke's lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "I've never had anyone say that," he admitted. There was a pause, and then he added, "Most people just stare, or they ask awkward questions, or they change the subject. It's easier to pretend the past doesn't exist." Samantha shook her head gently. "Pretending doesn't make the past go away," she said, "and ignoring it doesn't make it less important. You can't hide from what shaped you, Luke, and you shouldn't have to." For a moment, the barn seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds, the shuffling of hooves, the soft nickering of horses, the faint rustle of hay, faded into the background. It was just the two of them, standing in the warm golden light, sharing a moment of unspoken understanding. Samantha realized that this connection, born of honesty, patience, and respect, was rare. She felt privileged to witness it, and even more privileged to be trusted with a piece of his story. Luke shifted slightly, as if gathering courage to continue. "Some scars," he said quietly, "remind me of choices I regret. Others remind me that I made it through, that I survived. I've learned to live with them, to carry them with me instead of letting them weigh me down. But it's not easy. Some days it's heavy." Samantha stepped a little closer, offering a reassuring smile. "I can't pretend to know exactly what that feels like," she said, "but I do know that scars aren't weakness. They're proof. Proof that you faced life no matter how hard it got, and you're still here. That's something to respect. Luke's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world outside the barn seemed to disappear. He nodded slowly, a subtle gesture of acceptance, as if her words had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying alone. You make it sound simpler than it feels, he said, a faint humor in his tone. But maybe that's what I needed to hear. They returned to the chores, but the atmosphere had shifted. Samantha noticed that Luke moved a little more easily, spoke a little more freely, and allowed small gestures of trust, like letting her adjust a stubborn gate latch for him. Each shared task was now layered with understanding, not just cooperation. She felt herself growing closer to him, not just as a coworker or fellow ranch volunteer, but as someone who was beginning to open up to her in ways he didn't with anyone else. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Luke suggested they take a break by the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. Samantha followed, curious, and found him sitting on a flat rock, watching the water flow gently over smooth stones. The colors of the sunset reflected on the surface, creating ripples of gold and orange that danced in the light. They sat together in silence for a few minutes, letting the sound of the water and the warmth of the fading sun fill the space between them. Samantha felt a deep sense of peace in that moment, a connection that didn't need words. And then, softly, she spoke. I think scars are beautiful in their own way. They tell a story no one else can tell for you. Luke's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. I've never thought of it that way, he admitted. Most people just see the surface. They don't stop to think about what lies beneath. Samantha smiled gently. Maybe that's the point, she said. They're reminders of everything you've been through, everything you've survived. And sometimes sharing that story, showing it, can be a gift, not just to others, but to yourself. He looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time, he allowed himself to relax fully. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a lowering of the guard he had carried so carefully. Samantha could feel it, and it made her heart beat a little faster, not with fear or awkwardness, but with a sense of closeness that had been building quietly over weeks. As evening fell, they walked back toward the ranch house together, the sky painted in deep shades of purple and orange. Samantha felt the warmth of the day lingering on her skin, mingling with the warmth of connection she now shared with Luke. The barn behind them grew quiet as the animals settled in for the night, the world softening around the edges. When they reached the porch, Samantha handed Luke a glass of fresh water. To surviving, she said softly, echoing the words they had shared days before. He accepted it with a faint smile, and for a moment they simply stood there, looking out over the fields and the setting sun. The bond between them was no longer defined by teasing or playful curiosity. It had deepened into understanding, respect, and a quiet trust. Each scar, each story, each shared glance had built a bridge between them, and neither could deny the strength of the connection forming. That night, Samantha lay in her cabin, reflecting on the day. She thought about Luke, about the stories he had shared, and about the quiet courage it took to carry scars without bitterness. She realized that the beauty of true connection was seeing someone fully, not just the parts that were easy to show, but the parts that bore the weight of experience, the marks of life's challenges, and the resilience that came from enduring them. For Luke, sharing even a small part of his story had been an act of bravery, and for Samantha, witnessing it had been an act of understanding, patience, and empathy. Together, they had created a space where honesty could exist, where trust could grow, and where connection could deepen without words needing to explain it. As she drifted to sleep, the sounds of the ranch filling the quiet night, Samantha felt a sense of anticipation for the days to come. There were more stories to be told, more moments to share, and a bond that was only just beginning to take shape. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the journey with Luke would not be easy. But it would be meaningful, filled with moments of learning, understanding, and quiet courage that could not be measured by appearances alone. The summer days at the ranch moved with a steady rhythm, each sunrise bringing new tasks and each sunset leaving trails of golden light across the fields. Samantha had grown accustomed to the routine, the early morning chores, the work in the barn, tending to horses and cattle, and the quiet moments in between. But now, alongside her duties, there was Luke. He had become a constant presence, not just someone she worked with, but someone whose presence added a subtle warmth to every part of the day. They spent hours together in the barn, repairing broken fences, moving hay bales, and checking on the animals. Samantha noticed how naturally they worked side by side, understanding each other's movements without needing to speak. There was a rhythm to their collaboration, a silent communication that made the labor feel lighter. Luke's quiet efficiency impressed her, but it was his patience and attention to detail that held her fascination. He treated the animals not as tools or tasks, but as living beings with personalities, fears, and needs. Watching him work, Samantha realized that his scars were only part of a story, one that included resilience, compassion, and experience. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the heat pressed down on the ranch, Samantha suggested they take a short break near the creek that ran along the edge of the property. Luke agreed, and they walked in companionable silence, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. Samantha sat on a smooth rock near the water's edge, dipping her fingers into the cool, clear stream. Luke joined her, settling beside her and letting his gaze wander across the flowing water. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an understanding that had grown slowly over weeks of shared work and quiet conversation. "You've adapted well to the ranch," Samantha said softly, breaking the silence. "You seem at home here, even though you've just arrived." Luke's lips curved into a faint smile. "I've spent most of my life around ranches," he said, "but this one, it feels different, quieter somehow. More alive in the small details. You notice things here, things you wouldn't anywhere else." He paused, glancing at her. "And people notice you too. That makes a difference." Samantha felt warmth rise in her chest, both from his words and from the gentle honesty in his tone. She understood what he meant. Life at the ranch was simple, yes, but it demanded attention, care, and respect for every living thing. And in that simplicity, she had found herself drawn not just to the work, but to the people who truly understood it. Luke, she realized, was one of those people. As they talked, Samantha found herself sharing small details about her life, about why she spent summers here, and about the little things she loved about the ranch, the quiet mornings, the smell of hay, the sound of horses moving in the stalls. Luke listened attentively, nodding occasionally, asking questions that showed genuine interest. He wasn't just hearing her words, he was understanding them, absorbing them with the same patience he had shown with the animals. Eventually, the conversation turned to him. Samantha hesitated for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you ever feel defined by your past, by the things you've been through?" Luke's gaze dropped to the water, watching it ripple over the rocks. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The past shapes you, whether you like it or not. But it doesn't have to define everything. I've learned to carry it, not let it control me. Every scar is a reminder, yes, but also a lesson." He lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I'm learning to accept that part of me, and I'm trying to move forward without hiding from it." Samantha nodded, feeling a deep admiration for him. It wasn't just the scars themselves, it was the strength it took to face them every day, to continue moving forward despite the memories they carried. She realized that courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, enduring, and steady. Luke embodied that kind of courage. Over the next several weeks, Samantha and Luke grew closer, their bond deepening with each shared experience. They worked together on repairs, took care of the horses, and even spent time teaching younger volunteers the routines of ranch life. In every interaction, they learned more about each other, not just the surface details, but the subtle qualities that made each of them who they were. Samantha saw how Luke's past had shaped his patience, his careful attention, and his quiet strength. And Luke, in turn, began to trust her with small pieces of his story, allowing glimpses of vulnerability that he had rarely shown anyone. One evening, as the sun began to set and the ranch was bathed in a warm, golden glow, Samantha and Luke sat on the porch steps, sharing a quiet moment. They had finished the day's chores, and the animals were settling in for the night. The air was filled with the soft scent of hay and the earthy aroma of the land. Samantha felt a sense of contentment she had not known before. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After the summer, I mean. After this time here." Luke looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I try not to think too far ahead," he said. "I focus on what's in front of me. But I know that life doesn't stay the same. Things change, people leave. But I hope that some things, some connections, can last longer than a season." Samantha smiled, understanding the weight of his words. She too had felt the pull of impermanence, the knowledge that the summer would end, that life would move forward in ways they couldn't control. But she also felt hope that the bond they were forming, built on trust, understanding, and shared experience, could endure. As the days continued, their friendship deepened into something more. There were moments of laughter, teasing, and playful banter, balanced by quiet conversations and shared work. They learned to rely on each other, to anticipate each other's needs, and to offer support without being asked. Samantha noticed how Luke's scars, once a source of curiosity and hesitation, had become part of the connection between them. They were no longer barriers. They were reminders of the strength and resilience that drew her closer to him. One afternoon, while tending to the horses, Samantha playfully nudged Luke. "You're getting faster at this every day," she said, smiling. "Are you sure you're not secretly training just to impress me?" Luke laughed, a low, warm sound that made Samantha feel lighter inside. "Maybe," he said with a teasing grin. "Or maybe I just enjoy doing it right. But if it impresses you, I'll take credit." Their laughter echoed across the fields, mingling with the sounds of the horses and the soft rustle of leaves. Samantha felt a sense of joy she had not expected, a feeling that this summer, this place, and this connection were creating memories that would last far beyond the season. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ranch in a warm golden glow, Samantha realized how much she had come to value Luke's presence. He was no longer just a mysterious newcomer. He was someone she trusted, someone she admired, and someone whose quiet strength inspired her. Their bond had grown from shared work into shared understanding, from curiosity into deep respect, and from playful teasing into genuine affection. That night, as Samantha lay in her cabin, she reflected on the day. She thought about the moments of laughter, the quiet conversations, and the way Luke had allowed her to see pieces of his life he rarely shared. She realized that true connection was not built on appearances or surface charm. It was built on trust, patience, and the willingness to see each other fully, scars and all. She drifted to sleep with a sense of anticipation for the days to come, knowing that the bond they were forming was only growing stronger. The ranch had become more than a place of work. It was a place of discovery, connection, and understanding. And Luke, with his quiet strength, his patient attention, and his courage, had become an integral part of that discovery. Over the following weeks, Samantha and Luke continued to navigate their shared experiences with care and attention. They learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, and to support each other in ways that went beyond simple friendship. Their bond grew stronger with each shared task, each quiet moment by the creek, and each conversation that revealed a little more of who they were. Samantha realized that the ranch had given her more than just work or a place to spend her summer. It had given her the chance to connect with someone in a profound, meaningful way. Luke's scars, once a source of hesitation and curiosity, had become symbols of resilience, courage, and trust. And she knew that the lessons she had learned from him, the value of patience, the strength of quiet courage, and the importance of seeing people fully, would stay with her long after the summer ended. As the sun finally set and the stars began to twinkle above the quiet ranch, Samantha and Luke sat together, watching the world in silence. The bond they had formed was strong, built on shared experience, understanding, and trust. And while the future remained uncertain, Samantha felt a sense of peace, knowing that some connections, once formed, could endure far beyond the moments that created them. The last days of summer came quietly, like the soft drift of clouds across a bright blue sky. The ranch was still alive with the usual sounds, horses calling to each other, the faint clatter of tools, and the rustle of hay in the barns. But there was also a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the season was drawing to a close, and change was approaching. Samantha had grown used to this rhythm, but now it carried a bittersweet quality. She loved the ranch, the animals, the quiet mornings, and the endless work that somehow felt meaningful. Yet she knew that soon the routine would end, and with it, a chapter of her life that had grown unexpectedly important. Luke, too, seemed aware of the approaching end of summer. He moved with his usual calm efficiency, but there were moments when he lingered longer than necessary, his gaze settling on the horizon or the familiar barn walls as if committing the details to memory. Samantha noticed it and felt a strange mixture of melancholy and warmth. They had spent countless hours together, working, talking, laughing, and sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Over those weeks, she had come to understand him in ways few others could, and he had begun to trust her with parts of himself that were usually hidden from the world. One evening, as the sun cast a golden glow across the fields, Samantha and Luke walked together toward the small creek at the edge of the property. The water glistened like liquid gold, reflecting the fading light, and the soft sound of it flowing over smooth stones filled the air with quiet music. They stopped at their usual spot, sitting on the flat rocks that had become their secret place over the past weeks. Samantha turned to Luke, her eyes searching his face. "It's strange to think that summer is almost over," she said softly. "It feels like it just began." Luke nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Time moves fast here, doesn't it?" he replied. "But some things, some moments, I think, stay with you, longer than the days that create them." Samantha smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I feel the same way," she said. "I've learned so much, not just about the ranch, but about people, and about seeing someone for who they really are, about trust and courage and patience." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And about scars. Not just the ones on your skin, but the ones that life leaves in everyone's heart." Luke looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and calm. "I've realized something too," he said finally. "I've carried my past for a long time, letting it shape me in ways I didn't always understand. But being here, And knowing you has taught me that the past doesn't have to weigh me down. It can be part of who I am and still let me move forward. Samantha reached out, placing her hand lightly on his. The contact was simple, gentle, and filled with meaning. It spoke of trust, understanding, and the bond that had grown between them over weeks of shared work and quiet moments. Luke's fingers curled slightly around hers, a subtle gesture of connection and acceptance. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the hills and listening to the water flow. The quiet was comfortable, filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing someone deeply, from sharing moments that are unspoken yet fully understood. Samantha realized that the connection she felt with Luke was rare. It was built on honesty, patience, and respect, and it had grown stronger with every shared experience. Over the next few days, they continued to work together, tending to the animals and preparing the ranch for the approaching autumn. Each task carried a sense of purpose, but also a quiet poignancy. They both knew that the end of summer was near, and with it, the certainty that their time at the ranch together would change. Yet there was no sadness in their work, only a sense of fulfillment and appreciation for what they had shared. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence near the pasture, Samantha glanced at Luke and noticed how the late sun illuminated the scars on his arms. For a moment, she remembered the first time she had seen them, how she had flinched without understanding, and how much had changed since then. She realized that those scars no longer held fear or discomfort for her. They had become symbols of resilience, courage, and the life he had lived. They were part of him, and she admired them now as much as she admired the man himself. "You know," she said lightly, "I think these scars tell a story worth hearing, and I feel honored that you've shared some of it with me." Luke looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Not many people see them that way," he admitted. "Most just look and move on. But you understand." Samantha shook her head gently. "I don't just see them. I see you, the whole you, and I like what I see." Her words were simple, yet they carried sincerity and warmth. Luke's expression softened, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a vulnerability that he rarely allowed anyone to witness. As the evening drew near, Samantha and Luke sat by the creek once more, the sky painted in deep oranges and purples. They talked quietly about the summer, the work they had done, the horses they had tended, and the small victories and challenges they had faced together. Each story, each memory, added another layer to their connection, deepening the bond that had grown steadily since the day Luke had arrived. Samantha realized that the summer had taught her more than she had expected. It had shown her the value of patience, the strength of quiet courage, and the importance of seeing people fully. She had learned that connection was built not just on laughter or charm, but on trust, understanding, and the willingness to accept each other's pasts and scars. And in Luke, she had found someone who embodied all of those lessons. As night fell, the stars appeared in the sky, twinkling above the quiet ranch. Samantha and Luke sat together in the soft glow of lantern light, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. They did not need words to explain the bond that had formed between them. It was present in their shared glances, their gentle touches, and the understanding that had grown over weeks of shared experience. Samantha thought about the future, about what would happen when the summer ended, when routines shifted, and when they had to leave the ranch. There was uncertainty, yes, but there was also hope. Hope that the connection they had forged, built on honesty, patience, and shared understanding, could endure beyond the season. Luke turned to her, his expression calm but full of meaning. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "I want you to know that this summer, it's meant a lot. More than I can say." Samantha smiled, feeling a warmth that filled her chest. "It's meant a lot to me too," she replied. more than I expected. And I hope it's not the end of what we've started. They sat together for a long time, watching the stars, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, and savoring the simple, profound peace of the moment. The bond they had formed was no longer just about shared work or playful teasing. It had become something deeper, something enduring. It was built on understanding, trust, and acceptance, and it had been strengthened by every challenge, every shared story, and every quiet moment of connection. In the final days of summer, Samantha and Luke continued to share their time with care and attention, making the most of every moment. They worked side by side in the barn, repaired fences, and tended to the horses, each task carrying the unspoken understanding that these days were precious. They laughed together, shared quiet conversations, and sat in comfortable silence by the creek, watching the sun set and the stars appear. Samantha realized that the summer had changed her. She had learned to see beyond appearances, to appreciate the courage and resilience in others, and to value the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. Luke had shown her that scars, both visible and invisible, were not weaknesses, but symbols of life's lessons, endurance, and growth. And she knew that the bond they had formed, built on trust, respect, and shared experience, was something she would carry with her long after the summer ended. On the last evening at the ranch, as the golden light of sunset filled the fields and the animals settled in for the night, Samantha and Luke stood together on the porch. They looked out over the familiar landscape, knowing that the summer had given them more than work or memories. It had given them a connection that was rare and meaningful. Samantha reached out and took Luke's hand, feeling the warmth and strength of it in hers. He squeezed gently, a silent acknowledgement of the trust, understanding, and affection that had grown between them. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing me, for understanding me, for everything." Samantha smiled, her heart full. "No, thank you," she said, "for trusting me, for showing me who you are, and for letting me be part of your story." They stood together in silence for a while longer, letting the moment settle over them. The ranch, the animals, the fields, and the sky all seemed to hold their breath, witnessing the quiet power of connection, trust, and understanding. And as the stars shone overhead, Samantha knew that some stories, like the bond they had formed, could endure far beyond the moments that created them. When night finally fell, they walked toward the barn one last time, side by side. There was no need for words. Their presence alone spoke volumes. They had shared a summer of work, laughter, trust, and understanding. They had faced moments of vulnerability and courage, and they had come out stronger, connected in a way that neither had expected. And as Samantha lay in her cabin that night, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, she felt a quiet certainty that the summer had given her more than memories. It had given her insight, understanding, and a bond that would remain long after the season ended. And in Luke, she had found a person who had shown her that true connection comes not from appearances, but from honesty, patience, and the courage to share one's story, scars and all.